What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. Once again, looking at a New York Giants mock draft today. This is a 3-round mock draft that I actually wrote yesterday. I'm going to clarify this. This is not a what I would do mock draft. This is more of a predictive. If the Giants wanted to build through the trenches, here's what a 3-round mock draft could look like. And in this mock draft, we have the Giants not taking a quarterback in the first round, circling back on one in the second round, and then adding an offensive lineman in round 3. And we kind of want to talk through each of those 3 scenarios. If the Giants go BPA in round 1, what does that look like? If they go QB in round 2, do we prefer Dart? Do we prefer Milrow? And then in the third round, who are some of the offensive linemen that the Giants could target? And as Alex always says, maybe don't target 2 offensive linemen from the worst offensive line in college football like the Giants did in 2022 with UNC. Love it when he says that because I think it's so true. Let's make sure that we're drafting high quality prospects when we're targeting offensive linemen in the draft. But we're going to go ahead and walk through this mock draft and again go through the different scenarios that could alter this mock draft, what we like about it, what we don't like about it, and really just kind of have a discussion on the Giants' potential draft plans. And one thing that I think is important to note, Alex just mentioned this to me before we started recording. Jim Nagy, he's the guy who directs the Senior Bowl every single year. He said that he's been talking to teams that have only 8 to 10 first round grades on prospects in this draft class. And I think that's important to kind of mention at the start of a mock draft episode, Alex, and kind of keep in mind as we go through these conversations throughout the draft process. This is a weak draft class, at least at the top. It's not top heavy. I've read other reports, Alex. ESPN's Matt Miller has said in the top 75, there are a bunch of players who are graded in that second to third round range, but that first round grade, there's not many of them. So it's a very strong class on day 2 of the draft, but day 1 and day 3, kind of not so good. So I think, again, that's important to keep in mind, especially if you want to connect it to yesterday's episode. If you guys tuned in, we were talking about potentially trading for a playmaker this offseason. If you're going to make a trade, this would be the offseason to do it when draft picks are less valuable because there are less high-profile prospects in this draft class. Now would be the offseason to kind of send away some of those draft picks for veterans to improve your roster. This would be the offseason where it makes more sense to do exactly that. So wanted to provide all of that context necessary before we dive into this mock draft. But Alex, with the first pick in this mock draft, I had the Giants at number 3 going with Penn State edge rusher Abdul Carter. And here's the rationale. So Sanders and Ward were off the board at number 1 and number 2 overall. Number 3 overall, I had the Giants going with Carter over Hunter because my idea for this mock draft was building through the trenches. Now, personally, I would take Travis Hunter if I were in the GM chair, but just for this one in particular, I wanted to explore what would happen if the Giants went edge rusher here. If they wanted to say, hey, you build inside to outside, you get defensive linemen, and then you figure out the other positions. So what's your thoughts on that? You know, if the Giants are picking number 3 overall, quarterbacks are off the board 1 and 2, Penn State edge rusher Abdul Carter, how do you feel about him? And also, how are you feeling today, my friend?
Doing pretty good, man. And listen, this is an interesting one because the Giants, in this instance, pass on a quarterback, or at least maybe don't have the chance to draft one because they go 1 and 2. I don't think that will be the case. But guys, let's be quite honest. A combination of Abdul Carter and Brian Burns would be one of the best pass rushes in football, right? Kayvon Thibodeau just hasn't reached his potential yet. You know, he's online, taking shots at Dez Bryant. Funny, haha. I want to see better performance. I don't really care about what you have to say about Dez Bryant on Twitter, unfortunately. So, looking at the situation at hand, going after a blue chip prospect in this draft class, you can't say that's a bad move, right? That's just simple BPA, Anthony. Going best player available. And I do think that if Cam Ward is not there, I'm okay with that strategy. I love Deion Sanders. I like Shadur Sanders. I don't think he's worth trading up for, and I don't even really think he's worth a 3rd overall pick, but because the Giants need a quarterback and he's one of the top 2 in this draft class, I think they're going to end up forcing that selection if that's how the draft falls. But if they decided, you know what, we don't think he's worth the 3rd overall pick, and we think Abdul Carter is going to be a generational pass rusher, you just can't pass on a talent like that. And I think that the Titans' new GM is thinking something similar. We're not going to pass on a generational talent. Now, the question is, do they label anyone in this draft class as generational? Is Travis Hunter generational? Is Abdul Carter? He's only been a pass rusher for a year, but this past season for Penn State, the 21-year-old had 13 sacks, 66 total pressures on only 354 pass rush snaps. So he was elite by most metrics. He was dominant against Notre Dame. He had 8 pressures in that game and he had a bum shoulder. So, you're looking at a player that could change the course of your defense overnight. And, if you're the Browns, Abdul Carter and Myles Garrett sounds pretty sexy. You know what I mean? That sounds pretty nice. That's kind of cool. So if you're the Titans and you want another big guy, another really great defensive player to pair with L'Jarius Sneed, your cornerback, and have that 1-2 punch in the pass rush and secondary, Abdul Carter is a damn good option too for you. So if you're the Giants, I definitely feel as though, Carter does really give you that elite presence in the trenches, right? This is a draft class where there's not that many blue chip prospects. Carter's one of maybe 2. And I think that it's really just Travis Hunter and it's Carter. You could argue Mason Graham, you could argue some other guys, but I think those 2 are the real blue chip prospects in this class.
Yeah, but I do want to kind of get your take on adding another edge rusher to this group. So I agree with you. He's one of the very few blue chip prospects in this draft class. Abdul Carter is sick. In fact, Daniel Jeremiah has him as the number 1 overall prospect in this draft class, ahead of Travis Hunter. So again, if you want to make the argument Giants go BPA, Abdul Carter is definitely in the running to be that BPA selection. But Alex, the Giants have invested so much in their defensive line already. Whether you want to talk about the extension on the interior to Dexter Lawrence, which was well deserved. Obviously, he's one of the best defenders in all of football. They've already invested $26 million a year into Dexter Lawrence. They invested a top 5 pick in 2022 to Kayvon Thibodeau. And they invested a 2nd-round draft pick via trade, plus a 5th-round draft pick via trade, plus a $141 million contract into Brian Burns last offseason. So, I ask you this question, Alex. Is drafting Abdul Carter number 3 overall overkill? Is that too much? Is that overinvestment in the defensive line?
Yeah, it is absolutely. It is absolutely overinvestment in the defensive line. And the reason is we just spent $140 million on Brian Burns. We are already paying Dexter Lawrence $20 million per season. We spent the 5th overall pick 3 years ago on Kayvon Thibodeau. We haven't developed Kayvon Thibodeau into the player that we thought he could be. That is by definition overkill when you spend $200 million, over probably more like 250, almost $300 million on 2 pass rushers, or 1 interior defender, and then obviously a pass rusher in Burns, and you spend a 5th overall pick on Kayvon Thibodeau. You shouldn't have to go out and get another pass rusher after that, Anthony. I think that's pretty clear, but when you have a generational prospect, or at least some people would label him as that, or you have a blue chipper like Abdul Carter could really take it to the next level, you have to consider it, in my opinion. You can't just ignore it just because it's a strength on your team or it's something you've invested in heavily. It's overkill, but man, yeah, I have to say it's just damn, it really leads to a really great presence there. So, with that being said, it's not my preference, but I wouldn't be upset about adding a player like that of that caliber. I'd probably go Travis Hunter over Abdul Carter just if I had to go BPA, because I do think that having that CB would be more valuable for the Giants right now because it's just such a weakness, and then having Hunter as that gadget threat that you can, not even a gadget threat, he's an elite receiver too. You can throw him in there as a receiver, even in the 4th quarter. You need that extra boost, you need that extra juice on offense. And you have yourself a premier playmaker you can inject into the equation at any given moment when you need it the most. Imagine if you were the Bills right now and, Khair Alam, I wouldn't even use Khair Alam, he's garbage. Maybe it looks like Benford. Let's look at Benford. Imagine Benford was healthy. You're the Buffalo Bills against the Chiefs this past weekend, and I know Benford wasn't in this game. Let's imagine he was playing. And 4th quarter comes around, you need to score, and Benford also was an elite receiver you could go inject into your offense at a critical moment. Wouldn't be a bad thing, that's for sure. So I don't hate the idea of Hunter. I think he solves a couple of weaknesses for us, and probably more so than Carter. If you have those guys equally graded, I think you just go for the need. If those guys have similar grades on your board, and the Giants are willing to go BPA.
Yeah, so obviously, like I said, in this mock draft, we're taking the BPA strategy here. But again, to the point of it being overkill on the defensive line, if the Giants were to take Abdul Carter, number 3 overall, what does that mean for Kayvon Thibodeau? Again, they're trying to build this defensive line. They have been. Dexter Lawrence in the interior, and then they wanted 2 tantalizing edge rushers in Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. This past season, Kayvon was good. He was not great. And that's kind of been the story of his 3-year career so far. But when the Giants drafted him 5th overall, they didn't just expect great. They expected elite. He has not been elite by any measurement of that word. He has not been elite at any point in his 3 years with the Giants. So, do you think that he's become expendable at this point, Alex? Do you think that you could draft Abdul Carter and then do you hold on to Kayvon and make
I
him
trade
your
him.
third edge rusher, or do you trade him? But I don't think his trade value is all that strong. So what happens in that situation if you draft Carter? And also, you make the point of cornerback being a bigger need, right? If you want to draft Travis Hunter over Abdul Carter and you're going best player available, so then you just take the need. I get that whole argument. But if you're internally in the New York Giants organization and you view Kayvon Thibodeau as, say, a disappointment from the 5th overall pick, and you don't think that he's an elite pass rusher, is pass rusher not a need? Because everybody can have average pass rushers. You need an elite pass rusher. So couldn't you make the argument that edge rusher, pass rusher is actually just as big of a need as cornerback if you have the mindset of building from the trenches outward?
You could make that argument. I think that it's just more about what we have invested at either position, and we just don't have much invested at cornerback. So I think, like, financially speaking, it's better to go and get the corner. A guy that's could be worth, if Travis Hunter obviously becomes that elite cornerback, he's going to be worth $20 million plus a season, theoretically,
Right.
similar to Burns.
So let's say that the Giants went into free agency and invested $20 million plus per season in a cornerback, or maybe via trade, whatever. Then what's the bigger need?
Well, then you just draft Hunter and put him at receiver. It's like you have that flexibility. I'm not to say that I don't think Carter is going to be amazing. It really just depends on what their board looks like, though. Like, if they have those two guys similarly graded, like almost identical, you just go for what's going to solve more problems for you. Like, what are your bigger weaknesses, right?
Yeah, but okay, let's imagine a world, because we think yesterday's episode said that the Giants were going to make a move for a significant weapon. Let's say they add a significant weapon on offense, a wide receiver, and they sign a big money cornerback.
Yep.
So then you have set yourself up to select the best player available regardless of need in the draft. Then which need do you think is greater? After you've signed the receiver, you've signed the cornerback, and now you're in the draft, and your starting edge rusher is Kayvon Thibodeau, or your other starting cornerback is Deonte Banks, I guess, so maybe you can make the argument then that Travis Hunter would be the selection, but even still, if you think premium pass rusher is more important and more valuable than premium cornerback, couldn't you make the argument that Carter would be the better selection for the Giants at that point?
You absolutely could. I mean, most people would say that a great pass rusher is more important than a great corner. So if that's the case, then yeah, you would go with Carter. I guess the counter is like Hunter's a freak. It's like you could. It is. I'll ask you this question as a counter because it's kind of interesting, right? Would you rather? Obviously, we both agree. Like, the pass rusher is more critical and more important than the cornerback. I think that's generally accepted. But in Travis Hunter's case, he also gives you the cornerback and value at receiver. So there's a little bit extra juice there, right?
I've got a counter to your counter.
Okay.
Abdul Carter gives you talent
play
at
quarterback
edge
too?
rusher and off-ball linebacker, inside linebacker. He played
Right.
that before he transitioned to edge rusher. So the same way that Travis
Michael
Hunter is
Parsons
versatile
did that.
for playing both sides of the ball, Abdul Carter is versatile for playing basically 4 different positions on defense. Left edge rusher, or let's say outside linebacker, defensive end, inside linebacker. He plays 3 different positions on the defense if you ask him to. So
Right.
you can make the argument that his versatility is just as valuable to the Giants as the versatility of Travis Hunter.
You could argue that, but I can't imagine a world where they're not sticking him out outside linebacker and saying, get after the quarterback, right? And here's the thing about Kayvon, though. He's not going to accept being a backup. He is going to force a trade in that instance.
Well, wouldn't that create a opportunity to make Abdul Carter that versatile piece that you move all over the defense? Because keep in mind, Micah Parsons, yes, he is an edge rusher, an outside linebacker for Dallas. He plays all over the place. They move him around almost every. Sometimes you'll even see him line up on the interior. They just say, okay, you are the best pound for pound defensive player on our team. We're going to put you anywhere that we can get a matchup opportunity on any given play. And they just move him all over the place. Couldn't theoretically the Giants do the same thing with Abdul Carter and keep Kayvon Thibodeau? Kayvon Thibodeau still plays starting level snaps, and they have Abdul Carter just move all over the defense. Couldn't you argue that that's more valuable than having a player who plays 12 snaps at wide receiver and then the rest at cornerback?
Certainly. It certainly could be. And that's kind of the discussion that the Giants would have in that instance, is like, what brings more value to our team? I can't answer that question. And, that's up to them to see, like, who's more valuable. I think that I personally would go with Hunter in this instance, just because you get value on both sides of the football, right? Like, I think you are able to offer your quarterback something and your defense something. So I think that versatility is a little bit more valuable to me than Abdul Carter's versatility just at inside linebacker and outside linebacker, because obviously you want him being your pure pass rusher in this instance, and maybe get some snaps at inside linebacker every now and then if you need him in certain packages. But I think that value on offense, critical moment, you need another weapon out there, and you're like, Travis, suit up. Like that is something that you simply cannot replicate at most times. So it's interesting. It's a really good question. That's just my preference, but obviously it could go either way in that instance.
Well, I'll make my preference clear as well. I prefer Travis Hunter because I think he's the best player in the draft class. I think Abdul Carter's special and he's amazing. I think that Travis Hunter is a better player. So I subscribe to the best player available strategy. I would take Hunter in that kind of vein, in that BPA strategy. However, I do think the more that we talk about this and the more that we make the devil's advocate argument for Abdul Carter, the stronger that argument gets in terms of his versatility, his ability to play all over the place, and just the value of a pass rusher, premium pass rusher versus a premium cornerback, which is what Travis Hunter is expected to be. Again, he could also potentially be a premium wide receiver as well. But again, I do think that there is an argument to be made for Abdul Carter, which is why I wanted to present this mock draft and have this conversation all throughout the first half of this episode. But moving into the second half of this episode, it's round 2 of this mock draft, and we have another debate to have here, really, Alex, but it's not really much of a debate. Jalen Milroe or Jackson Dart, right? Because if the Giants pass on a quarterback in the first round, because there isn't really a quarterback to draft at number 3 overall, let's say that they go into the second round, they've got the second pick in the second round, now they want to just throw Dart at the board and take a quarterback, no pun intended. Is that quarterback Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe? And in this mock draft, I had them take Jalen Milroe, not because that's what I would do. It's not. I would take Jackson Dart over Jalen Milroe. But in this mock draft, the whole premise was they're building through the trenches and trying to build a running game, stop the run, and build the run. So Milroe was the logical solution here. But for me personally, I would take Jackson Dart. And honestly, Alex, one of the reasons why, we were talking about it yesterday, the hand measurements for Jalen Milroe, unprecedentedly small hands. I bet you that gets him taken off of draft boards by the time April rolls around. I'm serious about that because I don't think people realize how important the measurements are to NFL teams. The fans might just say, oh, whatever, he's got small hands, who cares? NFL teams don't see it that way. They see it as a data and statistical thing. Never has a starting quarterback had hands that size, so never will a starting quarterback have hands that size. That's how an NFL thinks, or NFL team thinks, and front office thinks. Therefore, I think that Jalen Milroe will be taken off of certain draft boards because of his hand size. And if you guys didn't see it, his hands are smaller than Kenny Pickett's hands. Kenny Pickett had unprecedented small hands for a quarterback. He did not succeed. It's just a thing. And I know, it's a hand size. Who cares? NFL teams care. That's why I'm bringing it up in this conversation, just because I know how valuable it is to them. Plus, you factor that in also, Alex, with Jalen Milroe is not a good passer of the football yet. He's a project. He's a great rusher, sure, but he's 6'1", 225 with small hands. You know who else is 6'1", 225 with smaller hands? Every running back in the NFL and none of the quarterbacks. So, that's just kind of what's difficult to project with Milroe. He is such a project, and now adding in this added variable working against him at the Senior Bowl with this measurement, it's just another reason to argue he is the one that you pass up and you take the more pure pocket passer and refined passer in Jackson Dart in the second round. So that would be my take on it. Again, I'm not saying because of the small hands I would pass on Jalen Milroe. I just think that Jackson Dart is the better quarterback and has the higher ceiling as a passer. Therefore, I prefer Jackson Dart. But I'll get your take on that, Alex. I know that you probably have some thoughts as well on Jalen Milroe. And again, in this mock draft, I went with Milroe, but personally, I'm going Dart all the way here.
I agree with you. The measurements aside, Milroe is not even remotely close to being ready to be an NFL quarterback. He is going to be a RPO, run option quarterback at first. They're going to have to build a scheme around him, and he fits a system that they can use him soon as a runner. He would be awesome for a team like the Ravens. And if the Ravens were looking to preserve Lamar Jackson's health instead of have him run all the time, they could just stick Jalen Milroe in there along with Derrick Henry and get some really fun running stuff going. I think that would be an insane grab for them. They can preserve Lamar Jackson's health for the playoffs, make sure he's ready to go, and then just basically batter Jalen Milroe and Derrick Henry as their runners. So could be an interesting concept for the Ravens, but for the Giants, it's Jackson Dart in this instance. And the reason for that is he is so much closer to being an NFL quarterback than Jalen Milroe The arm talent's good. It's not great, but it's good enough. He's got some real traits. He can throw on the run. He can throw off balance. He keeps his eyes downfield. Yeah, he's coming from a system that really focuses on open receivers and first reads with Lane Kiffin. So I get that there's going to be some development time that needs to happen here, and that's why he's a second round pick in this instance. But he's got a lot of really good tools, and he's a very, very solid athlete. That guy can run. We saw him make some incredible runs on the last film session we did for Jackson Dart. And looking at his throws, he's got a good deep ball. He abandons his fundamentals sometimes. He's a little bit off balance. So there's stuff that needs to be tweaked in terms of his actual technique and how he loads his weight and stuff like that. But that's stuff that will be refined at the NFL level. That is stuff that can be fixed. He's just a gunslinger, though. Like, he kind of fits the Brian Dable mold of, like, he wants to be aggressive. He wants to make plays. The play is never dead with him. And he's 21 years old, right? He's a kid. Like, he's not even fully developed. I know people are talking, oh, he's a little short. I'm like, guys, he's not even fully developed yet. He could grow another inch. Like, that's how young he is. So I do think that right now, Jackson Dart is one of those players that if they took him in the second round, love the upside. I doubt they're going to go in that direction. A lot of people don't think he'll be there in the second round. I actually do think he'll be there in the second round because this draft class is weak, and I know quarterbacks are always at a premium, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was drafted in the early second. I really don't think that that's crazy to consider. But the Giants aren't going to run that risk. I think they're going to take a quarterback 3, most likely. But Dart, if it happened that quarterbacks come off the board 1-2 and the Giants are left taking BPA, I would not be surprised if they targeted a player like Dart with some upside who can step in, keep plays alive, operate an offense at an adequate level. I do think there's a lot of growth that needs to happen with him, but if he puts it all together and those traits blend with a balanced approach where he can hit the easy reads, he can get through his progressions, he can improve a bit in the pocket. He bails a lot towards pressure. We said that a lot in the film reviews. If he can navigate the pocket a bit more efficiently, he's going to be a good NFL player, but he's got to go to the right place. He is the perfect example of, like, this guy's got to go to the right place to succeed. And I think the Rams are the right place for him personally because I think they can build an offense that he can fit in and he can learn. And Stafford's a damn good player to learn from. So I do think that's a good fit for him. But if you're the Giants and you go BPA in the first, I'm taking Dart over Milroe every single time.
I would also take Dart over Milroe. I know that we've obviously done a few film reviews on both of those prospects here on the channel, and initially I was like, they're kind of neck and neck for me, and I have them close. But the more we watch Dart and the more that I watch Milroe personally off the channel, the more that gap widened for me. And I think that Dart is a much cleaner passer of the football. I think he's got better traits as a passer, and I think he has more room to grow and more reliability to grow. I think that Milroe is too much of a wild card in many respects. And while I still think he's an intriguing prospect, and I think that a team could turn him into a star, I think he does have a rare athleticism that could make him a truly special quarterback at the NFL level. I think it's very difficult to make a true wild card turn into a true superstar. And for the Giants, I'm not sure if it makes sense to take on such a project. Dart is also a project in many ways. He has a lot to clean up. He needs to learn how to read NFL defenses and get through his progressions. But all of those things really are teachable in many respects. And I think that in the right situation, the Giants could be that situation. I think that they have an opportunity to build around a guy like Dart. Easier time doing that than they would around building for Jalen Milroe. So I would go Dart as well, even though this mock draft had the Giants going Milroe, and this is what we're discussing. We're also kind of altering it. So far, through those two picks, Alex, we haven't agreed with either one. We both lean towards Travis Hunter in round 1. We both lean towards Jackson Dart in round 2. So what can we expect in April? Well, we can probably expect the Giants to do the opposite. Take Abdul Carter in round 1 and Jalen Milroe in round 2 because they never listen to us and they always like to do the opposite, even if we end up being right about something. But no, I digress off that. Moving on to round 3 of this mock draft, though, Alex, this is the pick that I do agree with. This one I will pat myself on the back and say, hey, good job. Marcus Mbao is this Purdue right tackle. I don't know if you've read about him or if you've watched him at all. The kid is really good. He's athletic. He's a mauler. And he's dealt with some injuries in the past, to my knowledge, as well. But he is a really good prospect who I think has a lot of upside to develop at the next level. And again, if we're talking about the darts that the Giants have thrown at the offensive line over the last several years, this is much better here in the third round. A Purdue tackle who actually has several years of starting experience and has played at a really high level before. I think he makes a lot of sense, and I know that a lot of Giants fans love Jermaine Illuminor as the starting right tackle of this team. I do too. You have to keep in mind, Illuminor's best seasons have been at tackle, some of them, and others have been at right guard. He's a very good right guard. And in fact, he might be a better right guard than he is a right tackle. So in this respect, Alex, I would definitely be open to taking a guy like Mbao in the third round. He doesn't have to start day one at all. He can sit behind the Luminor for a while and then eventually take over as a starter. But if he needs to start during the season, you can move a Luminor to right guard, and then Mbao takes over at right tackle. And honestly, based on what we've seen from Evan Neal, I know he was a first round pick, and we're talking about a third round pick here. I would be willing to bet Mbao would be a better player from day one than what we've seen from Evan Neal throughout the first 3 seasons of his career. So I like this selection, but I also just generally speaking like the idea of the Giants taking either an offensive or defensive lineman in that third round. That's a sweet spot for both of those positions in this draft class. This class is loaded at defensive tackle and it's loaded on the offensive line in those middle rounds. This is where I think the Giants can feel comfortable at pick. I believe it's number 65 in the draft. This would be where I target the trenches once again.
Yep. I mean, look, the truth is, I think the Giants should go realistically quarterback in the first round, defensive tackle, or rather offensive lineman or defensive tackle in the second round or third round, interchangeable. I literally would just do that, unless there's a really good prospect or player there that is just so much higher above the rest in terms of BPA that like just falls into our lap. Even if it's a receiver, like I love Igbuka from Ohio State. If he was there in the second round for us, I would absolutely freaking hammer the draft for that. I would absolutely run to the podium if Igbuka was there. He is going to be a good player in the NFL. He is a pro. He gets it. And he gets in-game adjustments, so, a little side quest there. But in terms of offensive linemen in the third round, I think the Giants should draft offensive linemen every freaking year. That's how I feel about it. Keep taking shots. Like you say about the quarterback position, keep taking shots until you get a really good one. Offensive linemen, yeah, we suck at developing them. But Carmen Bracillo showed some upside there, and they didn't draft an offensive lineman last year. He inherited a whole bunch of busts. And I don't think that that's fair for Carmen Bracillo to have to fix that. So, I think you give the Giants, you give him a chance to select a guy he likes. You know what I mean? A guy that he thinks could be good. Maybe it's the guy that you found out of Purdue. So, for the most part, I'm totally on board with drafting an offensive lineman in the third round, someone that's got some versatility. Illuminor, that's my guy. I freaking love Jermaine Illuminor. I actually would love to keep him at right tackle, but if you have a better player and he can move to right guard, I'm totally open to that as well. So, I'm fine with that. I still love Patrick McCarry as a free agent option for the Giants. That versatility is so needed, and he can start for you, and then he can help you supplement any injuries. Like that guy is exactly what we need. But I'm still drafting an offensive lineman because we need more depth, and we need more starting players, and we need to be able to graduate those depth prospects into starters at some point to keep costs down in the future. So 100% on board with an offensive lineman in the third round, especially one with some versatility, like you mentioned. So this is definitely up my alley for sure. I do think the Giants, a good draft to me, quarterback, either defensive tackle or offensive line, interchangeable in the second or third rounds. I am happy with that. Like that, we walk away addressing a couple of big needs, and most likely they're going to be BPA as well, because the defensive tackles in this draft class are absolutely fantastic. So I think you're going to walk away as one of them as probably the BPA in the second round anyway.
Very, very, very possible that the best player available in round 2 or round 3 is a defensive or offensive lineman. And again, for the Giants, they have needs at both of those positions, which is why you just take the BPA. This is so a draft, Alex, especially with how weak it's expected to be, this class. This is not a draft for need class. The Giants should be going BPA every single time they're on the clock in this upcoming draft class, in my opinion. Now, obviously, that's going to depend on what their roster looks like after free agency, but the Giants really need to be more diligent this offseason. I think not focusing on those big splash moves and adding 1 to 2 high profile pieces in free agency, build out the roster and plug in all of those needs with just adequate starters, and then build through the draft. Take the best player available in the draft regardless of position. You don't need to spend big time money on another Brian Burns-esque addition and just patch up one position and then scramble to sign a below average starters at all of the rest of your needs. Fill in every need with an adequate starter, then go into the draft and hope that you get the best player available with every single draft pick, and hope that those guys develop long term to take over the positions of the guys that you just signed in free agency and become much better players than they are in year one. I think that's how the Giants should build, because that's what rebuilds are, building through the draft to lay a foundation and create some long term growth for your roster. That's how the New York Giants should operate this offseason. But of course, we'll see how they do operate. It's going to be very interesting. This is one of many mock drafts that we're going to discuss between now and April. Alex, there's going to be so many different variations of this. Who do the Giants select at 3, 34, 65? And do they even have all three of those selections by the time we get to April? Totally possible that they trade them. Joe Shane loves to make trades. He does it every single year. I mean, he traded a third-round pick in 2023. He traded a second-round pick in 2024. Who's to say he doesn't trade a first-round pick in 2025? Who knows? That's at least been the progression. Third to second to now first would be next. So maybe there is a round one trade in the midst for the Giants brewing. Who knows? But it's going to be really fun to see how it unfolds and react to all of it. Alex, any last thoughts on this mock draft or just any of the prospects that we discussed in general, or any ideas that you have for the New York Giants draft plans?
I mean, ideas like we just have so many needs, and the financial situation of the Giants with Daniel Jones's dead money hit. We have about $32 million to spend on free agents, guys. So I know people in the comments like, go get a big name, like go acquire this, go spend money on that. It's not that simple. You know what I mean? This team has a lot of needs. That's why I like a guy like Patrick McCarty, who's not going to get a huge contract, but can solve a bunch of needs for you on the offensive line. That's why I like a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who, you know, he's a bit older, but he's going to solve a big need for you at receiver at a more reasonable cost. DJ Reed, Charvarius Ward, I'd basically rule those two guys out because that's going to take up 70% of our cap space that we have available. So like it's just not reasonable to think that's possible unless they're backloading contracts, which is always a risk, and it sets up another GM if they fail this year to take over a ship that's already weighed down with financial costs. So, you know, in my opinion, they're going to take a more balanced approach. They're going to get some, versatile weapons and versatile pieces this upcoming offseason. And the draft is going to help them solve a couple of needs, whether it be quarterback. They need a veteran quarterback, a bridge, Anthony. You know, you want them to spend on that. They just don't have the money to spread around. Like, we don't have $100 million in a rookie quarterback like Jaden Daniels. It's just not the case for the Giants. So I do think they're going to have to get very creative. I do think they're going to have to draft exceptionally well. And it's going to be, this is a tough one, man. Joe Shane and Brian Dable have a Mount Everest to climb right now to save their jobs. They have one offseason to get it done. Their decisions have to be flawless, in my opinion. There is no excuse. There's no excuses anymore. You have to have flawless execution and flawless decision making moving forward. Otherwise, it's your days are over. It's done, you know? So that's kind of my opinion at the moment. I don't know how they're going to do this because it's going to take a Herculean effort, but there are some value players the Giants have to prioritize in free agency, and they need to go BPA in the second and third rounds most likely because they have to hit on this draft. They cannot be drafting for need. And I know we're talking about offensive linemen and DTs and you know what, and why that would be our preference. But they need to draft the best players available, Anthony. They have no room. They have no margin for error. If they don't take BPA and they start drafting for need and those guys are not that good, they're going to get fired. So, like, they have to take the best players available because if they have a good draft class, that's the only thing that just saved them to begin with, was how strong the rookie draft class just looked. If they didn't, if this was a rerun of their first draft class, we'd be in really deep crap right now. So that's what I'm going to say, man. They're going to take the most high probability choices they can possibly make, and that's the only way they're probably going to be able to save their jobs, in my opinion.
Listen, you know me, major proponent of drafting for the best player available, regardless of your positional needs on a roster. I think that's the way. Outside of the quarterback position, I always have to make that clarification, that distinction. It's BPA unless it's quarterback. You know, you reach on quarterbacks and that's it, in my mindset at least. And yes, I do think reaching on a quarterback is fine practice as long as you don't marry yourself to that quarterback for 6 years, despite how bad he is, and try and force him to work and hand him an egregiously bad contract in the process. So there are ways to move on from a bad quarterback and reset your roster. The Giants just failed to do that. But again, it's going to be an interesting offseason. We talked about trade candidates, signing candidates, all this stuff for the Giants offense. And again, if you're looking at the NFL draft, so many fun mock drafts are going to be able to be cooked up here on this channel. And I actually think, Alex, one thing that we can do, we've been doing a lot of live film breakdowns on the channel recently. I think a great one that we could do soon on a live stream, and guys, let me know down below if you like this idea. Maybe we do a live mock draft, an early one. It's January, so, you know, Obviously, we get a better idea of what the roster is going to look like after free agency in March, but maybe we could do some sort of early mock draft here live on the channel and have the chat kind of select the picks with us and give their take and 2 cents on each prospect that we're considering. I think that's something that we will do in the coming days or weeks here on the channel. So make sure you stay tuned to that. More film breakdowns on the way. We'll probably do another one or two by the tail end of this week anyway. And again, continuing to discuss all of the different little rumors, news, tidbits, everything surrounding the New York Giants right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you listen to Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.
Perfect.